Nobody saw this coming. Just days after being praised as the player who could carry the Indiana Fever back to championship contention, Caitlin Clark suddenly found herself at the center of a storm that has WNBA fans completely divided. And now, after a stunning loss to the Atlanta Dream led by Angel Reese, many fans believe head coach Stephanie White may have just thrown her biggest star under the bus. The final buzzer had barely sounded before social media exploded. Questions started pouring in from every direction. What went wrong? How did Indiana lose control of a game they were expected to dominate? And why did some of Stephanie White's post-game comments sound like they were aimed directly at Caitlin Clark? For months, Clark has carried enormous expectations. Every game is analyzed. Every turnover becomes a headline. Every missed shot sparks debate. But this time feels different. This time, fans aren't just criticizing the performance on the court. They're questioning what's happening behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream are enjoying the spotlight. Reese delivered another statement performance, energizing her team and giving critics even more ammunition in the ongoing rivalry discussions that continue to dominate basketball conversations. But here's where things get truly interesting. As clips of Stephanie White's comments spread across the internet, fans began dissecting every word. Some believe the coach was simply demanding accountability. Others are convinced she was shifting blame away from the team's larger problems and placing it squarely on Clark's shoulders. And if that's true, the implications could be massive. Because when a franchise player feels the pressure from opponents, media, and even her own sideline, cracks can begin to form fast. So was Caitlin Clark unfairly blamed for Indiana's collapse? Or was Stephanie White simply telling a hard truth that nobody wanted to hear? The answer may be far more shocking than anyone expected. Before anyone can understand why this loss created such a massive reaction, it's important to understand the pressure surrounding the Indiana Fever long before they ever stepped onto the court against the Atlanta Dream. From the moment Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, expectations were unlike anything the league had ever seen. She wasn't simply another highly drafted rookie. She arrived as a phenomenon. Record-breaking college performances, sold-out arenas, television ratings through the roof, and a fan base that followed her every move. The Fever instantly became one of the most watched teams in professional basketball. That level of attention comes with benefits, but it also creates enormous pressure. Every win becomes proof that the hype is justified. Every loss becomes a national conversation. Throughout the season, Clark has found herself carrying responsibilities that most players never experience so early in their careers. Opposing teams build defensive game plans around stopping her. Analysts spend hours dissecting every possession. Social media reacts to every statistic, whether positive or negative. At the same time, Indiana entered the year with legitimate championship ambitions. The organization invested heavily in building a roster capable of competing with the league's elite. Veteran leadership, talented role players, and a coaching staff led by Stephanie White created the belief that the Fever were ready to take the next step. Many experts predicted Indiana would become one of the most dangerous teams in the league if Clark continued developing into a superstar. But basketball rarely follows a perfect script. While Indiana showed flashes of brilliance throughout the season, consistency remained a challenge. Some nights the offense looked unstoppable. Other nights the team struggled with turnovers, defensive breakdowns, and late-game execution. Those issues became increasingly noticeable whenever the Fever faced physical, aggressive opponents. And few players embody that aggressive style more than Angel Reese. For years, Reese and Clark have been linked together in basketball conversations. Their rivalry dates back to some of the most memorable moments in women's basketball history. Every matchup involving either player immediately generates headlines, debate, and intense fan engagement. Whether fair or unfair, many fans treat every Clark-Reese game as a referendum on who is winning the rivalry. That brings us to Atlanta. The Dream entered the matchup determined to make a statement. Despite the attention surrounding Indiana, Atlanta believed they had the talent and toughness to expose weaknesses in the Fever's game. From the opening tip, their approach was clear. They wanted to speed Indiana up, force mistakes, dominate the physical battles, and make Clark uncomfortable. It worked. As the game progressed, Atlanta repeatedly disrupted Indiana's offensive rhythm. Passing lanes disappeared. Defensive pressure increased. Transition opportunities became harder to find. Meanwhile, Angel Reese seemed to thrive in the chaos. Every rebound energized her teammates. Every hustle play shifted momentum. Every emotional reaction from the crowd appeared to fuel Atlanta's confidence even more. What made the situation even more frustrating for Fever fans was that this wasn't the first time Indiana had struggled in these circumstances. Critics have spent months arguing that when games become highly physical and emotionally charged, the Fever sometimes lose their identity. Instead of dictating the pace, they begin reacting to what opponents are doing. Supporters pushed back against that criticism, pointing to Indiana's impressive victories throughout the season. But after this loss, those concerns suddenly returned with full force. The spotlight naturally shifted toward Caitlin Clark. Not because she was the only player on the floor, not because she alone determined the outcome, but because franchise stars always receive the largest share of attention when things go wrong. That reality exists in every sport. When a championship contender loses, fans immediately look toward the biggest name on the roster. Could Clark have shot better? Could she have protected the ball more effectively? Could she have found ways to counter Atlanta's defensive pressure? Those questions dominated post-game discussions. Yet another storyline quickly emerged: Stephanie White's comments. As reporters gathered following the defeat, many expected the coach to focus on team-wide issues, defensive mistakes, rebounding battles, execution problems, rotational adjustments. Instead, some viewers interpreted portions of White's remarks as criticism directed specifically toward Clark. The reaction was immediate. Social media clips spread rapidly across basketball communities. Fans replayed every quote, analyzed every facial expression, and debated every sentence. One side argued that White was simply holding her star player accountable. After all, great coaches often challenge great players publicly and privately. Accountability is part of championship culture. The other side saw something very different. They believed Clark was being unfairly singled out for problems that extended far beyond one player. They argued that basketball is a team sport, and that Indiana's struggles involved multiple areas, not just the performance of its young superstar. As the debate intensified, the loss itself almost became secondary. What started as a disappointing result on the scoreboard evolved into a larger conversation about leadership, responsibility, and pressure inside one of the WNBA's most scrutinized franchises. And that's when the real controversy began. Because the more fans examined the game, the more they started asking a difficult question. Was Stephanie White delivering necessary accountability after a frustrating loss? Or was Caitlin Clark being positioned as the face of a failure that belonged to the entire team? The answer would ignite an even bigger storm than the defeat itself. The moment that changed everything didn't happen during a spectacular highlight play. It didn't come from a game-winning shot, and it certainly didn't come from Angel Reese celebrating another big victory. Instead, the biggest controversy began after the game ended. As frustration spread through the Indiana Fever fan base, attention quickly shifted from what happened on the court to what was said afterward. That's when Stephanie White found herself at the center of a storm she probably never expected. For many viewers, her post-game comments sounded like a message aimed directly at Caitlin Clark. Whether that was her intention or not, suddenly became the biggest debate in women's basketball. The Fever had just suffered a disappointing loss. The offense never looked fully comfortable. Defensively, Indiana struggled to contain key Atlanta runs. Possessions slipped away at crucial moments. Execution broke down when the team needed stability the most. Normally, losses like that are viewed as collective failures. Championship teams win together. Championship teams lose together. But this situation felt different. As clips from White's press conference spread online, fans immediately began interpreting her words through the lens of the Fever's biggest star. Some believed she was sending a clear message to Clark. Others argued she was speaking about the entire team. The disagreement exploded almost instantly. One side insisted that accountability is necessary. They argued that Clark is no longer a rookie being protected from criticism. She is the face of the franchise. With that status comes responsibility. If a superstar struggles, coaches have every right to address it. In fact, some fans believed White was doing exactly what great coaches are supposed to do. No excuses, no special treatment, no protecting players simply because they are popular. According to this perspective, Clark needed to hear difficult truths. But another group saw the situation completely differently. They weren't upset because White demanded accountability. They were upset because they believed Clark was being asked to carry blame for problems that extended far beyond her individual performance. And that's where the real conflict began. Because when fans started reviewing the game itself, they noticed something important. Indiana's issues weren't limited to one player. Defensive rotations were inconsistent. Rebounding battles were lost. Transition opportunities disappeared. Role players struggled to make key shots. Communication appeared shaky during several crucial stretches. Yet somehow, the conversation kept circling back to Clark. For her supporters, that felt unfair. The frustration became even stronger when comparisons started emerging. Fans pointed out that when other stars have difficult games, analysts often discuss team-wide problems. When Clark struggles, however, every mistake becomes front-page news. Every turnover becomes evidence. Every missed shot becomes a storyline. Every defeat becomes her responsibility. That perception only intensified after Atlanta celebrated the victory. On the opposite side of the floor, Angel Reese was receiving praise. Commentators highlighted her energy. Analysts discussed her impact. Fans celebrated her leadership. The narrative was simple. Reese helped lead a winning team. Clark was part of a losing one. Whether fair or not, that contrast created the perfect environment for controversy. And then came the first twist. The more people analyzed the game, the more they realized Clark's individual statistics weren't the entire story. In fact, several observers argued that Atlanta's defensive game plan was specifically designed to make life miserable for her. Double teams appeared frequently. Passing lanes closed rapidly. Physical defenders pressured her from the moment she crossed half court. Every touch became a battle. Every possession required extra effort. Instead of asking why Clark struggled, some fans began asking a different question. How much responsibility belongs to the coaching staff? That question changed everything. Suddenly, attention shifted away from Clark and toward Stephanie White herself. Critics began wondering whether Indiana had done enough strategically to help its star player succeed. Were adjustments made quickly enough? Did the Fever counter Atlanta's defensive pressure effectively? Were teammates put in positions to capitalize on the attention Clark attracted? The answers weren't obvious, but the questions continued growing louder. For the first time since the loss, the spotlight wasn't entirely focused on Clark. White was now under scrutiny too. And that's when the conversation became even more complicated. Because coaching in modern sports is incredibly difficult. If a coach publicly challenges a star player, critics say the coach is creating division. If the coach avoids criticism, people accuse them of making excuses. It's a no-win situation. Stephanie White suddenly found herself caught in that exact dilemma. Every sentence she spoke was being interpreted through multiple perspectives. Supporters believed she was demanding excellence. Critics believed she was deflecting responsibility. Neither side appeared willing to back down. Meanwhile, Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream continued benefiting from the chaos. Their victory was slowly becoming overshadowed by Indiana's internal drama. What should have been a story about Atlanta's performance was turning into a debate about blame, and that debate kept growing. Television analysts weighed in. Podcasters offered opinions. Social media accounts posted clips and reactions. Basketball fans dissected every detail. The situation evolved from a simple loss into something much larger. A discussion about leadership. A discussion about expectations. A discussion about whether superstar athletes are sometimes held to impossible standards. For Caitlin Clark, the timing couldn't have been worse. Throughout her basketball career, she has faced extraordinary pressure. Every accomplishment is magnified. Every mistake is magnified even more. Many athletes struggle under that kind of spotlight. Yet Clark has repeatedly shown resilience. That's why some observers believed the criticism was being exaggerated. They argued that one difficult game should not define an entire season. Others disagreed. They believed championship contenders must be judged by championship standards. And if Indiana wants to reach that level, everyone, including Clark, must accept criticism when performances fall short. Both arguments had merit, which made the debate even more intense. But then another twist emerged. As fans continued analyzing White's comments, some began suggesting that the coach wasn't actually blaming Clark at all. Instead, they argued that people were hearing what they expected to hear. Because Clark generates so much attention, every comment naturally gets connected to her. According to this view, the The controversy itself was being driven more by fan interpretation than by anything White actually intended. That possibility complicated the narrative even further. Maybe there was no public blame. Maybe there was no hidden criticism. Maybe everyone was reacting to assumptions. Yet by that point, the damage was already done. The story had taken on a life of its own. And once sports controversies reach that stage, they rarely disappear quickly. Instead, they grow. Every interview becomes important. Every practice becomes news. Every future game becomes another chapter in the story. That's exactly where the Indiana Fever suddenly found themselves. Not just dealing with a loss. Not just dealing with Atlanta. Not just dealing with Angel Reese. But dealing with a controversy that was now threatening to overshadow everything else. And as emotions continued rising across the basketball world, one thing became increasingly clear. The biggest battle was no longer happening on the court. It was happening around the team itself, and what happened next would push the entire situation into even more explosive territory. Just when it seemed the controversy couldn't get any bigger, the conversation took a dramatic turn. Because as fans continued debating Stephanie White's comments, another uncomfortable reality started emerging. The Indiana Fever's problems might be much deeper than one bad game, much deeper than one coach, and much deeper than one player. The loss to the Atlanta Dream suddenly became a magnifying glass, exposing issues that may have been building for weeks. At first, most people focused exclusively on Caitlin Clark. That was expected. She's the biggest name on the roster. She's the player every camera follows. She's the athlete. Opposing teams prepare for more than anyone else. But after emotions settled down, some fans began asking a question that completely changed the discussion. Why does every Indiana loss seem to become a Caitlin Clark story? Think about it. When the Fever win, analysts talk about teamwork, chemistry, coaching adjustments, and contributions from the entire roster. But when they lose, the spotlight almost immediately shifts toward Clark. Her shooting, her turnovers, her decisions, her mistakes. That pattern wasn't going unnoticed anymore. And suddenly, a growing number of fans started pushing back. They argued that Clark was being held responsible for problems that existed throughout the organization. The criticism intensified when game footage began circulating online. Possession after possession showed Atlanta aggressively targeting Clark. Defenders trapped her. Help defenders rotated quickly. Passing lanes disappeared. Every possession became a battle. Yet many observers noticed something troubling. The Fever often struggled to punish Atlanta for overcommitting to Clark. In theory, when a defense focuses that heavily on one player, opportunities should open elsewhere. Teammates should find open space. Additional scoring chances should emerge. But too often, Indiana failed to capitalize. That realization created another layer of frustration. Because if opponents are building entire defensive schemes around stopping Clark, isn't it the responsibility of the coaching staff and supporting cast to make them pay for it? Suddenly, criticism that had initially been directed toward Clark started spreading throughout the organization. And that's when the shocking reveal began to take shape. The real issue might not have been individual performance at all. It might have been expectations. From the moment Clark entered the WNBA, she transformed Indiana into one of the league's biggest attractions. Attendance exploded. Television ratings increased. National attention followed. Every game became an event. But with that popularity came an unintended consequence. People began expecting Clark to solve every problem. Need a comeback? Clark. Need offensive production? Clark. Need leadership? Clark. Need a miracle? Clark. No athlete can sustain those expectations forever. Even the greatest players in basketball history required help. Championships are won by complete teams, not individuals, yet many Fever fans had unconsciously started viewing Clark as the solution to everything. The loss against Atlanta exposed just how unrealistic those expectations may have become. And then, another twist arrived. As discussions spread across sports media, some analysts pointed out that Clark wasn't the only star facing criticism. Angel Reese had spent much of her professional career dealing with similar scrutiny. Every game became a referendum on her talent. Every performance was compared against expectations. Every mistake became social media content. The difference? Reese's team won. And winning changes everything. Victories silence criticism. Losses amplify it. That's why Atlanta's success created such a powerful contrast. While Reese was receiving praise for helping secure a major win, Clark was facing questions about responsibility. The optics were impossible to ignore. One player was being celebrated. The other was being blamed. Fair or not, that became the dominant narrative. But the biggest reveal was still coming. As more analysts reviewed Stephanie White's comments in their full context, a surprising possibility emerged. Many of the most controversial interpretations may have been driven by fan frustration rather than the actual remarks themselves. The shortened clips spreading online lacked context. Longer versions painted a more complicated picture. Instead of targeting Clark specifically, White appeared to be discussing broader issues involving execution, discipline, and decision-making. That distinction mattered a lot, because if White wasn't actually blaming Clark directly, then the entire controversy suddenly looked very different. Instead of a coach attacking her superstar, it became a story about how quickly narratives can spiral in modern sports. One clipped quote becomes a headline. One headline becomes a debate. One debate becomes a full-blown controversy. Before long, everyone is arguing about something that may never have happened the way it was originally presented. That realization shocked many fans. Some who initially criticized White began reconsidering their position. Others doubled down. They argued that even indirect criticism carries extra weight when directed toward a player under constant scrutiny. The disagreement only intensified. Meanwhile, inside the Fever organization, the pressure continued building. Because regardless of what White intended, perception had become reality. Fans were talking, media members were talking, former players were talking. Everyone had an opinion, and every new discussion added more pressure to a team already dealing with high expectations. The timing couldn't have been worse. Indiana wasn't just trying to recover from a difficult loss. They were now trying to manage a growing public controversy. Every future game would be viewed through that lens. Every interaction between Clark and White would be analyzed. Every body language clip would be scrutinized. Every quote would become potential headline material. That's the reality of being one of the most watched teams in sports. And perhaps that's the most shocking reveal of all. The Atlanta Dream didn't just defeat the Indiana Fever. Their victory exposed how fragile public narratives can be. One loss turned into questions about leadership, questions about accountability, questions about coaching, questions about team chemistry, questions about the future. And as those questions continued spreading across the basketball world, one thing became impossible to ignore. The biggest challenge facing Indiana might not be anything happening between the lines. It might be handling the pressure, expectations, and scrutiny that now follow them everywhere they go. Because if the Fever thought the criticism after this loss was intense, what happened next would generate an even louder reaction from fans, analysts, and former players across the entire WNBA. As soon as the final buzzer sounded and the Indiana Fever walked off the court after their disappointing loss to the Atlanta Dream, the conversation exploded across the basketball world. But surprisingly, the discussion wasn't centered on Angel Reese's performance, Atlanta's game plan, or even the Fever's defensive struggles. Instead, one name dominated the headlines: Caitlin Clark. Within minutes, social media platforms were flooded with reactions from fans, analysts, former players, and sports personalities. The debate wasn't simply about the loss itself. It was about the comments that followed. More specifically, it was about the growing perception that Caitlin Clark was somehow being held responsible for problems that went far beyond one player. Many Fever supporters immediately pushed back against the criticism. One viral post read, "How is Caitlin Clark responsible for every Indiana Fever loss? When they win, it's a team effort. When they lose, somehow it's her fault." The comment quickly gained thousands of likes and sparked a heated debate among WNBA fans. Others pointed out that Clark has been carrying enormous expectations since the day she entered the league. Every missed shot is analyzed. Every turnover becomes a headline. Every loss becomes a referendum on her value. Meanwhile, other players across the league are rarely subjected to the same level of scrutiny. That perception only fueled the backlash. Sports talk shows began discussing the controversy the following morning. Several commentators questioned whether Stephanie White's post-game remarks unintentionally shifted attention toward Clark, instead of addressing the broader issues affecting the team. One analyst argued that basketball is ultimately a team sport. No single player wins or loses games by themselves, he said. The Fever's challenges go much deeper than one superstar. That opinion quickly spread across basketball circles. Former players also entered the conversation. Some defended White, arguing that coaches are responsible for holding their stars accountable. Others felt the messaging was problematic. They believed that constantly emphasizing Clark's mistakes risks creating a narrative that places unrealistic pressure on a player who is still developing at the professional level. Meanwhile, Angel Reese's supporters viewed the situation very differently. Many argued that Reese deserved more credit for Atlanta's victory. Instead of focusing entirely on Indiana's struggles, they felt the media should be talking about the players who actually secured the win. One popular comment captured that sentiment perfectly. "Why is every conversation about Caitlin Clark? Atlanta won. Angel Reese played well. Give credit where it's due." That perspective resonated with a large segment of fans. Yet even as Reese supporters celebrated the victory, the Clark debate continued dominating headlines. The rivalry between the two stars once again became the center of attention. Every statistic was compared. Every highlight was dissected. Every possession became evidence for one side or the other. Some fans argued Clark had been unfairly criticized. Others claimed she still had areas that needed improvement. The basketball discussion gradually transformed into something much larger than a single game. National sports media picked up the story. Television segments dedicated entire blocks to analyzing the Fever's direction. Was Indiana maximizing Clark's talent? Was the roster construction flawed? Were coaching decisions contributing to the team's struggles, or were expectations simply unrealistic? Nobody seemed to agree. That disagreement only increased the attention. As the debate intensified, Fever players were inevitably drawn into the conversation. Some teammates publicly supported Clark. Others emphasized the importance of collective accountability. The message coming from inside the locker room appeared clear. This wasn't about one player. This was about an entire team trying to find its identity. But outside the locker room, the noise kept growing. Former coaches weighed in. Basketball writers published lengthy columns. Podcast hosts spent hours discussing the controversy. Even casual sports fans who rarely followed the WNBA suddenly had opinions. The situation had become impossible to ignore. What made the reaction particularly interesting was how divided it became. One group believed Clark was being unfairly targeted. Another group felt she should be held accountable as the team's biggest star. A third group argued the entire debate was distracting from the real issues facing Indiana. Each side presented compelling arguments. Each side believed they were defending the truth, and none appeared willing to back down. The intensity of the discussion reflected Clark's unique position within women's basketball. Few athletes generate this level of attention. Few players can turn a regular season loss into a national conversation. That reality has brought tremendous visibility to the WNBA. But it has also created enormous pressure. Every performance carries significance. Every result feels magnified. Every comment becomes a headline. Even industry executives reportedly took notice of the growing conversation. The league has benefited enormously from increased fan engagement. Television ratings have risen. Attendance has surged. Interest continues growing. But moments like this reveal the challenges that come with unprecedented attention. The spotlight can elevate players. It can also create controversy. And right now, nobody sits closer to the center of that spotlight than Caitlin Clark. Meanwhile, supporters of Stephanie White argued that the coach was simply doing her job. They pointed out that great coaches demand excellence from their best players. Holding stars accountable isn't criticism, it's leadership. According to this perspective, White wasn't blaming Clark. She was challenging her. The distinction may seem small, but supporters insisted it matters. Still, many fans weren't convinced. They felt the optics were difficult to ignore, especially after a loss, especially with cameras rolling, especially when emotions were already running high. By the end of the week, one thing had become obvious. The game itself was no longer the main story. The reaction had become bigger than the result, bigger than the box score, bigger than the standings. The controversy had evolved into a broader discussion about leadership, expectations, accountability, and the future of one of basketball's brightest stars. And as the Fever prepared for their next game, questions continued swirling. Was this simply another difficult night in a long season, or was it evidence of deeper tensions beginning to emerge beneath the surface? Because if the reactions from fans, analysts, and insiders revealed anything, it's that the conversation surrounding Caitlin Clark is far from over. In fact, after what happened following this loss, it may only be getting started. Just when it seemed the dust was finally beginning to settle after Indiana's loss to the Atlanta Dream, a new question started circulating among fans, analysts, and even former players. What if this game was never really about the loss? What if it exposed something much bigger happening inside the Indiana Fever organization? Because the more people replayed Stephanie White's comments, the stranger the situation seemed. Think about it. The Fever have dealt with injuries. They've struggled defensively at times. They've battled inconsistency throughout stretches of the season. There have been games where multiple starters disappeared offensively. There have been nights when the bench provided little support. Yet somehow, after this particular loss, the spotlight once again landed directly on Caitlin Clark. That alone raised eyebrows. Many fans began asking why every major conversation seemed to circle back to the franchise superstar. Was it simply because she's the biggest name, or was there something else happening behind the scenes? The speculation only intensified when basketball insiders started discussing the immense pressure currently surrounding the Fever. This isn't a normal rebuilding team anymore. The expectations are completely different. Every game is televised. Every quote becomes news. Every loss sparks debate. And every decision gets dissected by millions of people. That's a level of scrutiny few organizations have ever experienced. Some analysts suggested that the Fever may be struggling to balance two competing realities. On one hand, they want to build a championship-caliber team. On the other hand, they're managing the biggest star women's basketball has seen in years. Those aren't always the same challenge. And that's where the final twist emerges. Because while everyone has been debating Clark's performance, Angel Reese's impact, and Stephanie White's comments, another question has quietly started gaining traction. Is Caitlin Clark being asked to carry too much? The numbers tell an interesting story. Night after night, opponents design entire defensive schemes around stopping her. Double teams, traps, physical defense, constant pressure. She enters every game knowing she's the primary focus of the opposing team's strategy. Few players face that reality every single night. Yet expectations never decrease. If she scores 25 points, people ask why she didn't score 30. If she records 10 assists, critics point to turnovers. If Indiana wins, it's expected. If Indiana loses, questions begin immediately. That burden is enormous. And some observers now wonder whether the Fever have reached a critical moment. Not because of the standings, not because of one defeat, but because of perception. The perception that Clark is simultaneously expected to save the franchise while also carrying responsibility for every setback. That's a dangerous balance. History shows that championship teams rarely rely on one player. Even the greatest stars needed help. They needed teammates. They needed organizational stability. They needed systems designed to maximize success. And that's why the aftermath of this loss feels different. For the first time, some fans aren't just questioning the players on the court. They're questioning the entire direction of the franchise. Can Indiana truly build a contender around Clark? Can the coaching staff manage the pressure that comes with unprecedented attention? Can the organization navigate the constant media storm surrounding its superstar? Those questions don't have easy answers, but they're becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Angel Reese's performance added another layer to the story. Every time Reese succeeds, comparisons with Clark inevitably return. The rivalry grows. The headlines multiply. The debates become louder. And the pressure on both players continues increasing. Neither athlete asked for that reality. Yet both find themselves at the center of it. Which brings us to the most intriguing part of all. Sources around the basketball world continue suggesting that Indiana believes its best basketball is still ahead. The organization remains confident. The locker room remains united. The coaching staff continues emphasizing long-term growth. But confidence alone won't silence the critics. Winning will. And that's where the stakes become enormous. Because the next few games may determine whether this controversy fades away or explodes into something much bigger. If the Fever respond with victories, many of these questions disappear. If the struggles continue, every comment, every coaching decision, and every player performance will come under even greater scrutiny. The pressure is building. The spotlight is getting brighter, and the margin for error is shrinking. For Caitlin Clark, Stephanie White, and the Indiana Fever, this may have started as just another regular season loss. But judging by the reaction that followed, it feels like something much more significant. The real story may not be what happened against Atlanta. The real story may be what happens next. And if the growing tension surrounding this team continues, the next chapter could be the most dramatic one yet. So now the question goes directly to you. After everything we've covered, the loss to the Atlanta Dream, the reaction surrounding Stephanie White's comments, Angel Reese's growing impact, and the endless debate over Caitlin Clark, where do you stand? Do you believe Stephanie White was simply holding her superstar accountable the way great coaches often do? Or do you think Caitlin Clark is being unfairly blamed for problems that go far beyond one player? And what about Angel Reese? Does she deserve more credit for helping lead Atlanta to victory, while much of the media focused on Indiana's struggles instead? The conversation is bigger than a single game now. It's about expectations. It's about pressure. It's about what happens when one athlete becomes the center of an entire league's spotlight. Every possession gets analyzed. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every win and every loss sparks another national debate. But maybe the biggest question of all is this. Can the Indiana Fever truly build a championship contender around Caitlin Clark, or are the expectations being placed on her simply too much for any player to carry alone? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is one debate that basketball fans clearly cannot agree on. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button because it helps the channel more than you know. Share this video with fellow WNBA fans and basketball lovers who need to join this conversation. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage, breaking stories, player updates, and the biggest controversies shaping the world of women's basketball. The Caitlin Clark story is far from over. The Angel Reese rivalry continues to grow. The Indiana Fever season is reaching a critical point, and if the reactions from this game are any indication, the next chapter could be even bigger than the last. We'll be watching every moment. See you in the next video.